Hi there, guys. Jennifer Neesett here, physical therapist and owner of Fit for Life Physical Therapy. So if you've been following along here, you know that this is chapter 3. This is chapter 3 in a 5-part series where I'm sharing my story behind Fit for Life and how we came to be with all of you. Sharing my story in an attempt to share my faith and my testimony and to be a source of encouragement for you all so that through my story and through my words, you may find hope. Perhaps you'll resonate with some of the struggles and find peace and strength and know that you too can find strength in whatever journey it is that you're being asked to walk. This particular chapter is the meat, I think, is the heart of my story. I actually said a little prayer before I pushed record because this particular chapter I'm entitling my Jonah story. We've taken you so far on a little bit of a journey through my Boston experience in 2018 and then through surviving and thriving through prostate cancer a few months later of that same year. This chapter, however, I indicated was personal. Some of you know the story and others of you don't because it was not a publicly shared journey. The date was April 30th, 2019. It was a cool day. From my memory, it was overcast, and it was a day like any other. It was mornings with Mom, in fact, for my boys, for my 2 younger boys. And what that meant was I was up and out early and at the school for our sons to share some time together with them in the morning for some muffins, for some coffee, for some fellowship. A yearly tradition at our school. So I'd already been up and out that morning on this April 30th day. And I came home to my oldest daughter, who was still home. There must have been some kind of a testing day, and she was allowed to sleep in and go in a little later. So one daughter already at school, the boys off at school, and it's just my oldest daughter and I. She overslept a little bit, and we're frazzled and struggling and attempting to get out of the house quickly in order to get her to school. It's a few days before her 16th birthday, and the topic of our conversation was calling to schedule her driver's test. We are having this conversation, we are visiting with each other, we are 2 miles from our house. I'm driving, luckily, because that almost 16-year-old had been asking to drive almost every time we got into the car. But on this particular day, at 10 o'clock in the morning, we would pull up to a 4-way intersection 2 miles from our house. The way that I drive my children to and from school hundreds of times a day, I swear it feels like that. We would stop at the intersection and then proceed through. Only the person coming from my left would fail to stop at his 4-way stop and proceed to impact the driver's side of our vehicle. We didn't see it coming. It's a 45-mile-an-hour speed zone, and we would sustain that lateral impact on that morning, April 30th. At the moment of impact, I knew I whiplashed. I think my phone fell from my hands. I heard my daughter say, "Oh my gosh, Mom, are you okay?" I knew my head hit the side window, and therein began the crazy journey of my Jonah moment. We would technically be fine physically unharmed in the crash. The other vehicle also technically, physically, people unharmed, both vehicles, neither drove away from the crash. What happens after an accident is sort of surreal for those of you that have been in an accident. There were witnesses, there were first responders. There's a blur of events. At some point, some young man came into the intersection and scooped up my daughter, who said she was fine, took her to school. And I would kind of go about the rest of that day, getting a ride to the rental car place, meeting a friend for coffee. That was something that was scheduled and kind of happened anyways. I got the rental car just in time to pick my other daughter up from school, who had an orthodontist appointment, and I just found myself kind of in this blur of going through the motions as if nothing happened. Already my body was starting to kind of let me know that it had sustained an impact. Kept checking with my daughter, who kept assuring me that she was fine. I even went back out later in the day to pick more children up, and it wasn't until later that evening when I got home and actually made a phone call to my mom that the tears started to fall, that the shock started to settle in as to the reality of what had happened. So I would go to the emergency room that night. I would be worked up for whiplash and a concussion, cervical strain. And over the course of the next few weeks, I would realize and appreciate the value of my brain. Over the course of the next few weeks, you see, after a head injury like that, the swelling proceeds gradually, and the symptoms would start to emerge slowly. Sleeping all of the time, crying all of the time, panic attacks as I thought I was okay to drive. Over the course of the next 7 weeks, I would suffer with symptoms of that concussion, unable to work, unable to drive for quite some time, unable to go to my children's events, especially volleyball. Track meets were possible for me to get through, but would result in headache and light sensitivity and just sort of an agitation in my nervous system. I remember literally in those first few weeks after that accident, asking people to please talk more slowly because I couldn't process what they were saying. I'd never had a concussion before, and that period of my life physically truly made me stop. I didn't work for 7 weeks, couldn't exercise, struggled to take care for my family. I was not any recognizable version of myself for quite some time. And it was in this season where God decided to work and speak into my life. I had a lot of time on my hands, a lot of time to pray and a lot of time to think. And a friend of mine sent me a message. She's a beautiful Christian woman, a friend of mine, and she was starting a Bible study, and it was called Jonah. I'd never done a Bible study before, and I thought, well, I have time now. I might as well. So during that season, once my brain was healed enough that I could concentrate and read, I began that Bible study. And in the course of that time, working through the Jonah Bible study, I realized something quite powerful in my life, that I was in fact Jonah. I was in fact running from something in my life, whispers in my heart and my head that something wasn't right, that perhaps God was calling me to go somewhere different or do something different. You see, I had been a physical therapist for 20 years, and for 10 of them, I had been employed by Hands-On Physical Therapy of Menor, a wonderful company owned by beautiful people who I still hold dear to my heart and consider friend and family. I felt loyal to them, and they truly did help form me into the type of therapist that I was. 10 years I spent with them. But for quite some time, I knew that something wasn't right. It was a wonderful clinic. I was able to work part-time, but those part-time hours were very long. They were long days filled with patients back to back to back to back. In fact, 10 patients each day that I worked, and 45-minute sessions of very manually based outpatient physical therapy. And I handled that quite well when I was younger. But as time had gone on, that was increasingly difficult for me to handle. My hands started to hurt. I came home from work and I would be in bed exhausted, especially after the marathon training and prostate cancer. When life had taken me down a few notches, I was struggling to hold on to my ability to perform my job duties, doing something that I love to do. I had attempted to make some compromises with my employer, work shorter shifts, work earlier hours. The other piece that was a struggle was the 4 children that we had at different stages of their schooling. We had high schoolers who were done from practice at 5:30, and we had middle schoolers and elementary schoolers who needed to be back up at their school for their practices in the evening, leaving those guys home for some unsupervised time on the days that I work, and also leaving my husband really unable to get everybody where they needed to be. And I knew that I needed something different, but I was running from those whispers. I was comfortable where I was. I was loyal to the people that I worked for. I loved them. And honestly, though, I can now sit here and say that that accident and that concussion and that Bible study making me stop and truly soul search and listen was where it's what needed to happen to get me to admit and then to have the courage to take action. And it was during this season that the idea of something different was born. Fit for Life physical therapy came out of probably one of the hardest physical struggles I've ever walked through myself at a time in my life when I was my weakest. Fit for Life physical therapy was born out of faith, a huge leap of faith. And there's so much more to this next chapter that I want to share with you, more personal stories about what was involved once I put out into the universe the decision, the idea, what would transpire in my heart and in my family. And in the next chapter, I'll share some of the stories about the leap of faith into and the transition into the season of Fit for Life physical therapy. I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing this story with me. And I hope that in my struggle, you find strength for your own journey. And I look forward to sharing the next chapter with you all. Thank you so much.